Welcome to Swords and Hammers, where truth comes clothed in tales, and the soul remembers what the mind forgets. Settle in and listen well. The Scribe Who Knew the Word. A tale of the command we copy but do not keep. Tova was the finest scribe the hall had ever produced. 40 years her quill had moved across parchment without faltering, without resting, without once losing the thread of a line. She had copied every psalm. Some of them 7 or 8 times over. Her hand was steady, her ink was clean, and her reputation was built on a single boast she repeated to every new apprentice who sat at her elbow. "There is no time to waste at this desk." She said it the way a priest says a blessing, from habit, with force, and without hearing it any more. The scriptorium was a long room with stone walls and high windows that let in a thin, grey light. 12 desks lined each side, each one stacked with sheets waiting to be filled. At the head of the room stood the master's station, and there Tova sat. A brass scale rested at the corner of her desk, used each morning to measure the weight of her ink powder against water. She had balanced those scales 10,000 times. Her hands were stained past washing. The ink had settled into the creases of her knuckles like a second set of veins. The others were slower than Tova. She knew this the way a hawk knows it is faster than a sparrow. It was simply the order of things. When the younger scribes paused between sections, staring at the ceiling or moving their lips, Tova's quill kept moving. When they asked questions about the meaning of a passage, she gave brisk answers and returned to her line. "Copy first," she would say. "Contemplate later, if there is time." There was never time. She had made certain of that. It would be wrong to say Tova did not love the Psalms. She loved them the way a jeweler loves diamonds. She handled them daily, knew their facets, appraised their worth, and never once wore them. She could tell you that the word Selah appeared 74 times in the scriptures. She could tell you it fell in Psalm 3 and Psalm 4, in Psalm 32 after the confession, in Psalm 46 after the command to become still. She could tell you it appeared 3 times in the prophet Habakkuk, each time after a line that split the sky. She could recite this information while her quill never stopped moving. Knowledge for Tova was a possession, and she had accumulated a great deal of it. The trouble, which she had not yet named, was that none of it had accumulated her. The apprentice arrived in the autumn, a girl called Rua, young, clumsy with the quill, given to asking questions at inconvenient moments. She spilled ink on her second day and wept over it, which Tova found ridiculous. "Ink dries," Tova told her. "Stop crying and copy the line again." Rua obeyed, but she was slow, maddeningly, persistently slow. She would copy a line, then sit with her hands flat on the desk, staring at the words she had just written as though they were a letter addressed to her personally. Tova watched this from the corner of her eye and felt a growing irritation she could not quite explain. One morning, Rua stopped mid-verse and looked up. "Tova," she said, "what does Selah mean?" Tova did not lift her quill. "It is a liturgical direction," she said. "A pause in the music of the temple. The word likely comes from a root, meaning to lift up or to weigh." "To weigh," Rua repeated. "Yes," Tova said. "The worshipper is commanded to stop, to take the truth that was just declared and place it upon the scales of the heart, to hold it there until its weight is felt. Tova paused. Not the Selah kind of pause, merely a breath for efficiency. It is the difference between hearing a thing and possessing it. Rua was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Do you do that?" Tova's quill stopped, not because she chose to stop it. It stopped the way a wheel stops when the axle breaks, suddenly, completely, with a sound that was the absence of all other sound. The scratching of nib on parchment, the rhythm that had scored every hour of her life for 40 years, ceased. Her fingers pressed against the desk. The cold of the stone bench rose through her robe, and she felt how heavy her own hands were when they were still. And in the silence that followed, the room seemed to grow very large. Rua was looking at her. The other scribes were not. They were bent over their desks, quills scratching. But the question hung in the air like smoke. "Do you do that?" The answer came to Tova, the way dawn comes to a valley. Not all at once, but as a slow, merciless brightening that reveals what the dark had kindly hidden. She had written the word Selah 1,000 times and obeyed it never. She had explained the command to a child more clearly than any scholar could have done, and the explanation had convicted her in the very act of speaking it. She was the servant who polished the master's silver each day, and had never once set the table for a meal. The brass scales sat at the corner of her desk, perfectly balanced, perfectly empty. She stared at them. For the first time in 40 years, her hands were still. Her ink-stained fingers lay flat on the parchment, unmoving, and the parchment beneath them held the words of Psalm 32. "I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I didn't hide." Selah. She didn't reach for her quill. She did not rise, or explain, or instruct. She sat. She read the line again, slowly, as though she had never seen it. She read it a third time, and this time the words seemed to press against her chest, with a weight she had not known letters could carry. Tova had spent a lifetime filling parchment. Now, in the silence of a single verse held still before God, the parchment began to fill her. The light had not changed, but the room felt different, closer, as though someone long patient had drawn near and was only now acknowledged. The guilt was hers, old, familiar, unnamed for decades. The forgiveness was his, older still and waiting, patient as a father at a gate. She had carried the verse across 10,000 sheets and never once let it carry her. Now it did. Now the scales tipped, not brass against brass, but truth against a soul that had finally stopped long enough to be weighed. Tears came, not the ridiculous kind, the kind Rua had shed over spilled ink. These were the kind that come when a woman discovers she has been starving in a room full of bread. Not because the bread was hidden, but because she was too busy counting the loaves to eat. The room was quiet. Rua watched, but did not speak. The silence held, and it was not empty. It was the loudest kind of listening. After a long time, Tova picked up her quill. She dipped it, slowly, into the ink. She looked at the scales at the corner of her desk, still balanced, still waiting. Then she looked at the psalm beneath her hand. "There is no time to waste at this desk," she whispered. But the words meant something different now. They meant, there is no time left to waste by refusing to stop. Every Selah she had copied was a door she had walked past without entering. And the doors didn't close. They stood open, still, patient as the God who had set them in the psalm and waited, decade after decade, for the scribe who knew his word to finally, at last, obey it. She bent her head over the verse, and she stayed. Selah.